The AP poll results are in for week 10, and we're at the point in the season where the punishment doesn't always fit the crime, but sometimes it does. I'm sorry, Oklahoma.
I got a feel-good story for you.
What else do you want the man to do?
We're counting down the best plays.
How do you define success?
George Wrighster.
This week's AP poll saw Oklahoma surrender its undefeated status in a 38-33 loss to the Kansas Jayhawks. A few weeks back, I talked about how the Big 12's biggest hope of inflicting pain on Oklahoma and Texas before they run off to the SEC was none other than Kansas. And the Kansas Jayhawks forced Oklahoma out of their typical game plan. Dylan Gabriel, 40-plus passes, and they got a pick six from Romello Dotson. The result was the AP voters dropping Oklahoma from 6 to 10. And usually, I harp on these voters to consider head-to-head results when two teams have the same record. But when a loss comes this late in the season, that result just doesn't seem to matter anymore. Oklahoma is now ranked 3 spots behind number 7 Texas, and only 12 of the 63 voters still have the Sooners above the Longhorns. One voter, though, Ron Counts of the Idaho Statesman, even dropped Oklahoma all the way to 15, 9 spots below where he had Texas on his ballot. So you would have to figure Ron Counts is a guy who definitely doesn't care about head-to-head results, right? Except Ron Counts has 6-2 Kansas at number 14, 1 spot ahead of Oklahoma. So does head-to-head matter or doesn't it? Maybe the only explanation is that sometimes it feels like a team is trending down and people vote off that feeling. Which is why I would not blame voters who noticed the University of Washington has struggled in back-to-back weeks with the 2 worst teams in the Pac-12 this year, Arizona State and Stanford, and then in turn ranked Oregon above them after the Ducks demolished a ranked Utah team on the road. So I checked, only Josh Furlong of KSL and Chuck Landon of the Charleston Gazette-Mail leapfrogged the Ducks above the Huskies. So again, I ask you, does head-to-head matter or not? When 51 of the 63 voters have Texas above Oklahoma and only 2 have Oregon above Washington, it's actually hard to tell. Last week, I pointed out that the conference that seemed to be getting the least amount of respect in the AP poll was the ACC. They had the 2 lowest ranked 1-loss teams in the Power 5, and Louisville ranked 4 spots below a Notre Dame team that they had already beaten. So how did voters process last weekend's results, which, if I'm being honest, only adds to the confusion? Louisville shut out Duke, a ranked Duke, who Notre Dame needed all 60 minutes just to beat a few weeks ago. Meanwhile, Notre Dame beat Pitt so badly that their coach Pat Narduzzi and his players were fighting it out in the open on social media after the game. And Louisville's only loss is to Pitt. But remember, Louisville also has a win over Notre Dame and a better overall record. Well, this week, Notre Dame comes in at number 12 and Louisville is now 15. And while only 8 voters thought Louisville deserved to be ranked above Notre Dame last week, this week that number jumped to 17 out of the 63. And speaking of Louisville, somebody needs to ask Scott Springer of the Cincinnati Enquirer how the Cardinals, who he had ranked 25th last week, could shut out Duke, who he had ranked 19th last week, and instead of Louisville moving up, they fell completely off his ballot altogether. And while he moved Notre Dame up 3 spots from number 15 to number 12. Scott, what are you doing, brother? Look at me in the eyes. You're on notice, Scott. You do not want to be a repeat offender. And Scott did come out on Twitter and apologize and say he messed up. It was an honest mistake. Well, you're on notice, Scott. You do not want to be a repeat offender. The last thing I want to bring up with this week's poll is Michigan. The Wolverines had a bye, but they didn't have a week off from controversy. They've been getting accused of running a sign recording operation, and every day more and more information comes out about exactly what went into that. The P in AP poll stands for press, and the one thing you'll see every so often in these polls is that they have nothing to do with the game on the field being factored into how they're ranked. It's why I wasn't surprised that USC was dropping after every win earlier this year. Did they look bad in those wins? Yes. But did Lincoln Riley's treatment of the media factor into those results? Nobody will say the quiet part out loud, so allow me to do it for them. You're damn right it did. So back to Michigan, who has crushed every single opponent that they've played this year. Schedule great? Nah, not really. But how did the Wolverines lose 10 first place votes on their week off?
How the hell you gonna get fired on your day off?
Do we really think they went from 19 first place votes to just 9 because of AP voters who've been discounting Florida all season, all thought Georgia deserved the bump for taking care of business in a game where they were 2 touchdown favorites? No, Kirk Bowles of the Austin American-Statesman dropped Michigan from first on his ballot to third this week behind Georgia and Florida State. And I'm not saying Bowles is punishing Jim Harbaugh, I'm just saying it deserves an explanation. Now let's get into my top 10 this week. Number 1, Florida State. Number 2, Georgia. 3, Michigan. 4, Oregon. 5, Ohio State. 6, Washington. 7, Texas. 8, Alabama. 9, Ole Miss. Number 10, Oklahoma. And here are the rest.